Hey everybody, it's Corey Stewart, and it is a Wednesday night, and I hope you're all doing well. So something that's been extremely disturbing that's been happening all over the country is the ripping down of all these monuments, all these statues and so forth. Let me tell you something, it is a sign of a declining civilization when people think it's okay, and in fact they're actually celebrated for taking down historical monuments. It's just not done in a civilized society. When it was done in the past, it was done by the Taliban, it was done by these horrible organizations throughout the world who wanted to destroy the past, wanted to destroy any monuments of the past, any remembrances of the past and so forth. Think about the kind of people who take down history, who want to cover it up, who want to, just rip down monuments. Well, one of the things you first think about, of course, is, the Cultural Revolution in China. Now, why did they do this? This is what the Chinese did in the 1960s. They wanted to destroy all remnants of the past. They wanted to destroy their history. They did tremendous cultural damage. They destroyed such great pieces of history and art, which they can never get back. And today in China, there's all this effort now to try to restore all that stuff, to try to bring it back. But of course, once it's gone, it's gone. That's what's happening in our country right now. I just never thought I would see it. And now the latest things, I don't know, in Minneapolis, I think it was earlier today or maybe yesterday, they took down a statue of Christopher Columbus. And then, of course, in Richmond, a couple of days ago, they ripped down a statue of Christopher Columbus and threw it in the river or the lake. And then in Boston, they actually chopped the head off the Christopher Columbus statue. And instead of the city saying that they're going to fix it and put it back up, what are they going to do? Oh, okay. Well, now that it doesn't have a head, we're just going to take the whole monument down. So these governments, they're not protecting these important monuments to the past. Where are the police? Well, I'll tell you where the police are. They're afraid to do their job. The police don't want to get in the way of these so-called peaceful protesters because they're afraid of being called racist, bigots, yada, 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 because elected officials won't back them up. They know it, and so they don't want to get in the way. You almost can't blame them. And now, one of the more ridiculous things is the 54th Regiment from the Civil War, Massachusetts Regiment, which was African American. They fought boldly and bravely in the Civil War, and a monument to them in Boston was defaced. Not once, but twice. Even after the protesters knew that this monument was to African American soldiers, they went ahead and they defaced it again. So here's the question. Well, one more example. And this is probably the most ludicrous example. And that is during the peaceful protests in Washington, D.C. a few nights ago. They went across, you've got Monument Avenue Embassy Row in Washington, D.C., where most of the embassies are from various countries in Washington. And they stop at the Indian Embassy and they deface a statue dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi. Well, there's a real white supremacist for you, huh? I mean, how ridiculous. These people have no concept of history. They don't even know what these statues are for, and they're ripping them down. Now, if you think that was just a mistake, that they just ripped down, they happen to think that, maybe Mahatma Gandhi was some sort of white nationalist or something. I mean, that's how stupid they are. Well, it happened again. It happened again. This time it was in London. I mean, this whole thing about ripping down monuments has gone international, and it's going all over Europe. And if you think we have a lot of historical things to lose, we're talking about things that are maybe, these statues are 100 years old, maybe a little bit older in some cases. In Europe, for those of you who have been there, these monuments and historical places, they're all over the place. They're all over the place. And they're not 100 years old. They're hundreds of years old. And we are just at the beginning of this thing of tearing down our history, tearing down our monuments. It's just absolutely terrible. So if they're tearing down monuments to Christopher Columbus and Mahatma Gandhi and to a black regiment from the Civil War, what does that tell you? folks, this really isn't about African American rights. In fact, this movement is not about helping African Americans. It's, in fact, Black Lives Matter itself, which I'm going to show in some succeeding little segments, is not led by African Americans. It's not a Black-led movement. And it's certainly not a movement that is even doing any good for African Americans. It's actually one that is very detrimental. So, you've really got to be a real thug to go into a city or any place else and rip down a statue dedicated to Christopher Columbus or Mahatma Gandhi or anybody else for that matter. So that's my sermon for tonight. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit more later on. Next couple things, we're going to be digging down. We're going to be digging down into Antifa and into Black Lives Matter, and I'm going to show you the overlap, because this is actually not two separate organizations, folks. It's one, and I can prove it. There's documentation out there. I have witnessed it firsthand. I can show it to you. I'm kind of in an interesting position that way, because I confronted these folks, these Antifa folks, back in 2017. Been following ever since. And by the way, for those Antifa members, and I know some of them come on and they listen to me and they watch this stuff, I want to let you know something. I've been studying you. I've been studying how you react. I understand. I study what gets under your skin. I understand what motivates you. And I'm going to use this information. Eventually, it is destroy Antifa. It will happen. Anyway, folks, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.